This is Maj Swaydan from Geo Investing. We're here with Joseph Mozden. Is that how you pronounce your name, Joe?
It is, but I'll go by Joe if that's okay by you.
Okay. CEO and director at Sonic Foundry, trades on the OTC under the symbol SOFO. And again, we like doing these fireside chats or combination presentations to help all of you at Geo Investing understand how we interview companies and how we interact with them, and getting you involved in our process. I had actually come across Sonic Foundry early in 2020 when it kind of got the hint that they were maybe going through some turnarounds, and then COVID-19 and the work from home kind of trend that it spawned kind of fits right into what these guys are doing. And Joe will get into more of that whole video capture technology that they do. And then I guess Joe came on board on the company in August 2020 and done pretty good at turning around the company. So we're going to talk to Joe, understand who Joe is, why he came to the company, get into some of those turnaround initiatives and what's happened so far, what hasn't stuck or what is sticking, and just learn about the company. And, at Geo Investing, we love turnaround stories where we have leading kind of brands or leading companies that have a really good presence in their industry that maybe have been struggling to grow, but something is happening. Either it's a catalyst within the company, with the current management team, or a new team comes in and finds new ways to grow. Because you already have an established, it's really interesting opportunity when you have established companies that already have presence. Yeah. And all you need to do is retool a little bit, and you can get some really interesting, awesome stories out of that. So, and I have been ready to talk to Joe one time, before we bring CEOs and management teams on to Geo Investing on these kind of fireside chats. I like to have conversations with them beforehand to make sure it's not going to be a waste of your time, that we vetted the company a little bit. And I think I really, Joe's story resonated with me, and I think it will with all of you. But hey, we still got to figure out if we trust what Joe's doing, and time will tell. So Joe, why don't you I'll lay it off to you here. Of course, you know that I own the stock, and that please, if you're watching this, you understand that you're aware of the disclosures on Geo Investing and our terms and conditions. You go back and read them. And I think, Joe, you have probably a safe harbor too that you can share. And if you just make sure you are aware of the safe harbor, and you can go to Joe's website, Sonic Foundry's website, check it out, or the presentation. I'm sure Joe will go through it. So Joe, floor's to you.
Cool.
Why don't you tell us about your history, some of the challenges you faced as a CEO in your prior endeavors, your successes, your failures, if you had any, and how that might have made you a better CEO, and why you think you're prepared for the Sonic Foundry job over here.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you for the invite, and we did have a conversation before, and I look forward to this one. I do want to share that I'm actually in our studio at Media Site, in our studio that we use for our virtual events, and so to kind of go with the theme of the fireside chat, I went for the bigger, comfier chair. Since this was Media Site, I could actually throw in a fireplace behind me and layer things in of that nature, but we'll pass for this one. So a little bit, I think what I would like to start off with, Maj, to your point of, what would make me a good CEO for Sonic Foundry? What do I feel makes me a good CEO for Sonic Foundry? And more importantly, from my perspective, what drew me to the opportunity? And if you check in my LinkedIn profile, you've seen I've operated in multiple sectors, right? I've been in technology, I've been in data, I've been in telecom, big data before it was even fashionable, most recently in higher ed. So I've been in multiple sectors, but the common theme, regardless of sector, has always been the type of opportunity that the company is looking to pursue. And for me, those opportunities involve either trying to create new high growth or focused on change. And the way I describe it, I mentioned this a little bit in the shareholder meeting, that change and or high growth, that's my gig. I get excited about it. I think I'm pretty good at it, and I definitely have a track record at doing that. And when I looked at Sonic Foundry, what I saw was first, just understand what the market that Sonic Foundry is in. So Sonic Foundry is we go to the marketplace under media site, and a lot of our product, that's our product line, so understand Sonic Foundry, though, is our listing. But media site is an ed tech company that does video capture, so uses hardware and software to do video capture. What I say is capture the video, we then ingest it, we then enhance that data, that video. So think of metadata association or tagging it, making it super searchable, if you will. We put it into our media site platform, which is our storage area, where you storage repository, our content management system, where you can then search it. And then ultimately, we push it back out to where the eyeballs are. And the eyeballs for us would be in a higher education space. The eyeballs are the LMS system. At a corporation, the eyeballs could be a corporate training center, or maybe it's all the employees watching a CEO town hall. And in our events business, the eyeballs are the attendees, whether they're attending an event live in person or whether they're virtual attendees. So that was the business model. So what I saw when I started to investigate Sonic Foundry and when this opportunity was presented was, it's a 30-year-old company. A lot of people don't know that, but it's a long-standing business. To your opening remarks module, companies that you're interested in. We've been in business for 30 years. We started in audio. We got so good at it, we actually sold a lot of it off to Sony. So Sony bought it, and then we reconstituted the business towards video. So 30-year-old business, highly dedicated, passionate employees, people who understand that since we're helping in education, whether it be in the higher ed market, the corporate market, or the government market, that we are helping educate people, and that's part of our mission, so very dedicated. A well-recognized, unique technology that has been dominant in its marketplace, and a client base which is almost unheard of from my perspective for this size company. We have 5,000 clients. We're in 65 countries. And so I saw all that coupled together, and here's where the need for change was, or as you said, a bit of a turnaround. The but was the way we've historically gone to market was we were very focused on the in-classroom capture of that life cycle. And we did that predominantly through hardware. And to me, if you were to say what's the challenge for MediaSite, it is how do you continue to do that, but we also have to recognize we need to be more consistent with the marketplace, because the marketplace is SaaS-based, it's used to subscription-based offerings, and so we need to make that adjustment as part of our growth trajectory. And to me, that speaks to a perfect opportunity for what I said I like, growth and change, which was we had a company of all those underpinnings, but they had to make a change in the way they go to marketplace, and that we need to think differently about what is the size of our market, or what are the markets that we can be in that we can grow substantially. Today we're a $35 million company. My vision for our company is we will be a $250 million company. I want a 10-bagger. If you look at my background, that's what I've done. I've gone into organizations and grown at substantial levels to that level. So have a whole bunch of thoughts on how we'll do that, and at some point would love to tell you about those as well.
That's awesome, Joe. Can you tell us about some of the past places you worked at, or that you've been part of, and what you've done there? I think you talked about DeVry, which was interesting because Sonic Foundry has a very solid footing in the educational industry. So maybe talk about those successes.
Sure. So my most recent assignment previous to Sonic Foundry was at DeVry University. And the area that I was in was it was a B2B section, if you will. It's called DeVry Works. And what we were focused on was, could we ultimately increase university enrollments by partnering with universities? So this is not a new concept, right? People have been doing this for a long time. And I would tell you, most people, most universities, I think, do a terrible job at this. And I say that because this is the go-to-market strategy for the majority of the universities, and it was for DeVry when I showed up. They would go to universities, they would say, hey, if you want to send your employees to my school, I'm going to give you a 20% discount or 15% discount. And for the corporation, there was no skin on they had no skin in the game. They would sign up, they would slap it up on their benefits page, and then students may show up, they may not show up. And everybody does this. Every university does this. To me, that is a failure to understand the business need of the client. The client is the corporation in that situation. And slapping something up and putting a discount on it, that to me is absolutely terrible selling. So I have a sales background and a general management background. To me, that's very poor selling. And so my view on that was, well, what's the problem that corporations are trying to solve? And can I then fulfill that through education? And so what I would suggest the problems that corporations were trying to solve was, one, talent acquisition. They're trying to figure out how do you hire employees. Remember, pre-COVID, and as we're starting to see now, extremely low unemployment rates. So one was talent acquisition. The other is what I'd call skills gap training, bringing people up, if you will. And then the third would be talent development, where education has probably played a long time. Like historically, they played in that space a lot. So my positioning of what DeVry Works was going to do, the way we shifted is we went away from sort of the discounts, slapping the thing on the benefits page to saying, hey, we want to be a partner to corporations to help them solve business problems of talent acquisition, talent development, and skills gap training. So what does that look like? So talent acquisition, an example of that was we worked with GE. So you may remember GE was going, remember when they had their commercials and they were talking about the grandson who was going to go to GE, and he's talking to his grandfather, and his grandfather hands him a sledgehammer, and he says, hey, you're going to need this if you work at GE, because he thinks of it as a big locomotive company, right? The reason GE was poking fun at themselves was they realized they had a brand issue, and they weren't able to attract new young talent. So in that case, what we did is we put together an MBA program targeted towards people who would come on board, where they'd ultimately be able to earn an MBA through work hours from GE, through some funding from GE, through some funding from our university. And then GE started to use that as a talent acquisition tool. So when they were looking to hire people, they'd say, hey, let us also tell you about this very specific program that is a technology MBA-based program. That's solving a client's business problem. And oh, by the way, we did it through education. What that did is it increased our enrollments. And so I share that because that's the orientation that I have when I'm thinking about now Sonic Foundry, like what business issue is in the marketplace and how do you solve it? And the net result at DeVry was when we got there, when I started there, the amount of new students that came through the corporate channel was about 3% of all new students. And within 2.5 years, it was actually 15% of all new students came through the corporate channel. Think of that level of growth in an industry overall, which was actually declining. So the enrollments in higher education overall have been declining by 1 or 2% a year. So against that headwind, not only did we offset it, but then we actually grew it. And so the total university was able to grow overall. And that's an example of creating extremely high growth within an organization in a short period by rethinking about the offering that's in place or the business that's in place. Does that give you some insight as to how I think about it and the way I go after it?
That's awesome. It kind of plays into Sonic Foundry. And you said earlier that, okay, well, Sonic was more, you thought of more of a hardware company. That's how they were thinking about a lot of it. So why don't you, before we get into some of the transformations you're going through, why don't you talk about historically how Sonic Foundry has earned the revenue, how you generate revenue, how much came from each source, and how that all works?
Yeah, so a couple things about Sonic Foundry. I talked to what we do, right? It's around the video capture space. So ultimately, allowing people, whether it be faculty, students, trainers, employees, CEOs, to be able to present, learn, and collaborate regardless of time and distance, right? So that's the video capture. That's the overlying thing. The way in which, because of our offering, a big focus of our activity is the room. So that could be the classroom, that could be the boardroom, and that involved putting hardware and software into those locations at a very high level, right? I'm talking enterprise grade. Imagine 350 classrooms. We do this for one university. They have 350 classrooms. Our equipment is in all the classrooms. It's literally tied into a scheduler. So whenever classes are, we know about it. So a professor walks into the classroom. When he or she walks in, the video picks up. We record the session. We are simultaneously streaming it to the students who are online at that time, as well as then bringing it into the media site platform. And we do all that without a single FTE. Like, this is enterprise grade platform. So about, at one time, almost 50% of our revenue was in that hardware, software, in the room capture piece, the remaining part being in the platform and then service. And then in the, up to about a year ago, we're probably in the 30%. And my goal this year is that we'll be probably closer to 25%. And it's not because I'm looking to bring that down, it's because I'm going to other areas to bring those up. And so today, if hardware was 25 plus the ancillary services, let's say, brings it up to 35, we're probably a 60-40 split today. 60 geared towards services and events, and then 40% hardware and associated hardware. I see that actually declining over time for a couple reasons. One is we will continue to grow these other services that we'll talk about in a bit, I hope. And so they'll consume a larger percentage of the overall revenue. And then the other reality is you have to be honest with yourself. If you're in the hardware business, it has happened in every darn industry, whether it was data networking or ERP. I mean, you pick it. Hardware, once the internet gets involved, starts to get commoditized. And that means the prices start to come down and down and down. And you have to recognize that. And we recognize that. We're damn honest about it. And we're building a plan to address that. So that was the revenue model.
Yeah, so to understand it more clearly, so you have the hardware, and the software services that are in the classroom. There's a price that's paid for that. There's also a recurring revenue type of component, or I guess is it recurring the right word, or repeatable based on what the data being consumed? So, is being streamed, right? So maybe talk about the non-hardware revenue. How is that earned and generated?
Sure. So to your point, in the classroom or in the boardroom is where the hardware component is, and that's declining. What I'll maybe can talk to you about now is other areas we monetize, and then where areas that I see us monetizing as we go forward. So if you think of that video life cycle, I think of as video sort of the capture, you get the video, and then you're storing it. We actually also talk about enhancing. I think there's opportunity to create value there, and then you deliver it. Historically, we monetize the capture part of that cycle and then the storage of that content, which we're now moving towards cloud. A couple of things. One is I think there's tremendous value in the content in the cloud that can be brought back to our clients as value-added services. For example, today when people think of events, all right, so an event takes place, you capture the content, you store it, users may use it a little bit for a couple more months later, then it's over. I think of that much differently, which is, well, why are the events companies even holding an event in the first place? It's not to have an event. It's actually because they're trying to drive membership. And so if that's your business problem, then you start to think differently about the content. Well, let's look at that content. Joe Mozden attended a conference, whether in person or virtually. I know Joe Mozden attended the conference. Let's say it was on financing of businesses. And then I did 2 or 3 breakout sessions, and let's say all those were based on equity capital raises. Well, now I'm interested in raising money overall. I'm probably focused on equity type raises. And so you can use that content to start to create a persona and information about Joe Mozden. Well, maybe once that event is done, historically associations would be like, hey, we'll see you next year. What we're conveying with them is that they can actually utilize that content to create engagement throughout the year to do what? To solve the membership problem. So how does that look? You know about Joe Mozden, you know what he attended? Well, if that content was important to me, and why not use, which we're doing now within our hosting arrangement, start to use machine learning to say, okay, we know what Joe attended, we got a persona about Joe. Based on that, why don't we curate some other content that's outside of the conference relative to equity capital raises, because we know it's important to Joe. And then after the event, maybe it's 2 months after the event, I get an email from the association saying, hey, we know you attended, this was an important area, we thought this information might be interesting to you. And then we do that at 6 months, we do that at 9 months. And what have they just done? They've created engagement with me through the entire year as opposed to focusing on that one single event. That's one example of where we are now utilizing other technologies of the content that we're storing to create value-added services. And what that allows us to do is we still continue to create monetization on the capture piece. We create monetization on the hosting piece, but now we've added monetization on the delivery, because when we deliver that now to our clients, it has value-added services tied to it. And what that has allowed us to do is, one of the pieces, if you look at our revenue per event, where we used to just host the event and that was our revenue, now we have that revenue plus this value-added revenue. In our events business, we're getting roughly 2 times the revenue per event than we have historically, because we're doing the hosting piece with the value-added services and the delivery of that content. So that's
awesome.
How we're starting to monetize what I think of as the last part of the life cycle.
Have you gone on any investor roadshows yet and participated in conferences yet? I mean, in your history of being a CEO and doing that, or have you not done that yet?
Yeah, so not as of yet. That said, I've spoken to quite a few, or started to speak to some investors from just kind of mapping out sort of our next steps. And really, the reason there is I'm in purgatory, right? I'm on the pink sheets.
Well, the reason I'm asking that question, Joe, is this. Actually, I want to kind of get your perspective on if you were involved in it, if you see some of the weaknesses that I perceive to be in some of these conferences. So I think what you're doing and talking about, just from my own experience of going to these brick and mortar conferences, even the virtuals, I'm curious what they're doing for, after the conference, what are they doing for the client? Meaning really the investors who are attending, right? What are they learning about us, if anything? Because I know I'm not being marketed, through after these conferences. And secondly, how is the conference really tailoring to the company post conference? And there really isn't anything else out there so companies have no really other options, but they have to go to these conferences. But I'm really curious to see if what you're doing is relevant to this space, my space, where I went out, and helping companies understand what kind of benefit you're really getting from these conferences and how to really start engaging with them afterwards, maybe to generate revenue.
Right.
And I don't even know if these conferences care about it, to tell you the truth.
Oh, they do.
Okay.
From a membership perspective, actually, more so than anything. Well, what I would say is we've started to have this type of approach of going to the market. Again, stepping back and saying, what's the business problem in the event space? It's not to throw an event. It's to increase membership. And so now the conversations we're having with our clients, they have completely changed the conversation, because what we talk about is, I know you do an event. I'm interested in how you would leverage that content to create greater value for your organization over the course of the year. And 2 things come out of our clients. One is, never thought of that. And B, no one's ever spoken to us about that. And so it's an extremely refreshing conversation in the event space. And what it's actually doing is it's allowing us to get out of the tactical. Do you need somebody to host your event? Oh, you already have somebody, then they're not interested. We're taking it and saying, you know what, even if you have somebody that's hosting your event, why don't we host your content, and we're going to demonstrate to you how we can mine the content to create value for you, to create engagement for your members, and how you can put together trigger campaigns and trickle campaigns to continue to communicate with them for the year. And all of a sudden, in some cases, we're actually getting the hosting contract, even though they already had somebody for the events. I share that because next year, I think we'll have a damn good shot at the event as well, because we're in the strategic part of that life cycle. So not so much to the investors, to your question, Maj, but definitely when we're talking to client sets, it has completely changed the conversation. And it's part of what's driving our 20% growth in the event space.
Well, now I want to talk about the data analysis part of your business. So maybe you could talk about, what do you do? So you captured the event and everything going on there. So what are all the things that you're capturing or categorizing, and are you making it searchable? Just give us an example of what you're doing and how you're doing it, actually, and why you're better. I mean, better than others. But there's a lot of companies out there that say they use AI to analyze data. So what are you doing that's so special and different, or are you?
Yeah,
question,
sure.
right?
Yeah, good point. It's both sides of that, right? So let me tell you what we used to do, right? Pre-COVID, predominantly what we did is we were the guys and gals in the back room, in the back of a conference room, capturing the video, the AV activity. And so we would capture the keynote speaker. We would do all the breakout rooms, whether that be 25 rooms or 100 rooms. We would capture all that content. We have a very fast editor, so we could clip that stuff, put it back together, and by the time the lunch keynote speaker came on, we could have that montage of everything that took place in the first 2 hours of the day. That's what we did historically. The event was over, we went home. It was actually somewhat repeatable revenue because we'd get those events year over year. When COVID hit, that line of business evaporated literally overnight. And so, you know, what do good companies do? They accept that piece, right? They look at the facts that are in front of them and they figure out how to adjust. And that's exactly what we did. What we recognized is, hey, we don't have to go to Orlando to run that event. If somebody still wants an event, if you think of what's happening is they're getting content from multiple speakers. They have a guest speaker, a facilitator, an MC, whatever you want to call it, kind of coordinating the day. We could do that remotely, and that's exactly what we did. So today we'll do an event. You know, we're doing an event right now. It's got 300 speakers from, I think, about a dozen countries across the globe. We're pre-recording the majority of that content, but then the day of the event, when there's a live stream event, the facilitator's coming on that is live, that is being streamed. Imagine it's me, and then I say, and you know what? Now we're going to hear from Maj, who's going to talk about debt restructuring. And now we're taking that pre-recorded work that we did with you, Maj, in advance of it, and it's streaming it right in, and it all seamlessly flows. So that's how we're running the events. But the way in which we're now further monetizing those events is we're also creating the registration for those events. We're creating sort of the exhibitor hall, which allows our associations to monetize some of the work they're doing with their partners. We are even doing post-production work. So you can imagine you have 200 or 300 different presentations coming, all different backgrounds and things of that nature. We standardize, so post-production, we standardize all that so it flows very easily. And now we're doing value-added services around the harvesting of the data. And that's early for us. We are in early stages of that level of activity. But that, to me, is a big recognition of the asset and an opportunity to monetize. And you know, 2 jobs ago, I was in big data before it was even fashionable. And so this is an area that I think I have a good insight into how you drive value out of it and how it can ultimately be monetized to the benefit of your clients.
Is any of your engine analyzing the data non-manually? So when you're doing these videos, like say for geoinvesting, and say there was something in this presentation you're doing today, or this talk, are there ways that investors can kind of search for things that might make them attract them to their story? Like if they wanted to put in, how are they using it to do research? I guess is a question. Like,
right.
Yep. Is that where we're going with this eventually? Like,
absolutely. And you know, we're well positioned to go to that far end of what that view is. I say that because one of the important things to understand about when we do video capture, as opposed to grabbing a file like YouTube, right? You can do playback basically. When we capture video, we actually do it in these isolated channels. So imagine there's the video that you're seeing right now. There's my audio, there's your audio. If I had slides, there would be slides. There's the scraping of the slides, pulling the content off the slides. So when we capture video, we capture it in all these different channels. And the reason we do that is to make the searchability extremely rich. So I could search on how often maybe I utilize a particular word, or I could talk about how often did the word come up in my slide deck at all. Things that you would never normally get in a traditional video piece. So that is our focus, to be able to have that deep level of data so that it can be then searched for clickable events, heat mapping, where do people go, what do they spend time on. And so that is where we are starting in the pieces we're doing. But again, to be full disclosure, we're on the earlier stages of a lot of that activity, but we have the fundamentals of the way in which we capture video to be able to do that.
Okay, and something else I wanted to touch upon too, and I don't remember if we talked about this before, was, I guess, 1.0 SOFO was really depending on your own hardware. and dealing with your own data you're collecting through the video capture. Can you work with other people's data now, like that's being other recorders?
Absolutely, yeah.
you're-
Great question. So the way I described it when I first came on, Maj, is, we had a great product. Going back to that concept, right, the life cycle, right, which is the video capture. You ingest it, you enhance it, you store it, you push it back out. But that essentially was what I called maybe not a closed loop system, but it was definitely a closed box system. In other words, it was all media site content. So we're using our hardware to ingest, we're putting it on our platform, and then we used our platform to push it out. And then we integrated with LMS systems and corporate training systems pretty consistently. We are now breaking that down, and the reason we're breaking that down is for a couple things. One is COVID has definitely trained almost every person to be a video creator. And so my phone is not handy here, but the phone is now a big part of the video capture world. And so we are opening up the front end, and we're using a protocol called RTMP, which is a very standard protocol for ingesting content. So now we could, the view there is I want to be able to ingest content from my competitors if they have hardware. I want to be able to ingest content from phones. I want to be able to ingest content from drones, right? They all use RTMP so that we can bring that in, because I want to be the centralized video content management system, regardless of where that content is coming from. So to that point, today we ingest Zoom content. Most universities want to save that, but there's really not an application to do that. So we are actually ingesting Zoom content. We'll soon be doing it for Teams. We'll have multiple front ends, because ultimately the power is to have one video content management system, as opposed to one for the LMS, one for my content, one for Teams, one for others. That creates a whole new business problem, whether a university or corporation, if you have multiple systems and they're not talking and you can't see all of your video content management strategy. And that's exactly what we're doing for the University of Leeds. So some of you may have heard me talk about the University of Leeds before, but the head provost there, Neil Morris, has always had a digital view of his organization in all aspects. And MediaSite is the video repository for everything that takes place from a video concept or structure on that university. So much so that the way Neil describes MediaSite is, he says it is his number 2 platform to be able to inform him about engagement and retention of students, only behind his LMS system. And if you know anything about universities, LMS systems, it's like SAP. They are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. So we are the premier platform outside of his LMS, which is a standardized item, for understanding engagement and retention and student success at his university. That is solving a business problem. That is being integrated into their strategy of where they want to go as a business.
Okay. Now we're talking video, but this audio capture is that a right word? Or there's podcasts now are a big part of what people are doing. So is what you do relevant there too?
Yeah, so we actually got our roots in audio. So when we started the business 30 years ago, it was pre cell phones and things of that nature, and it was the same concept where we started to realize you could capture audio in multiple layers. And so our roots, long-winded way of saying our roots are in audio. And so yes, we absolutely do focus on audio. Though right now, majority of our audio is usually tied to some form of a presentation or a video concept, but it's easy for us to extend it to podcasts and things of that nature, and it's one of the things that's on our drawing board that we're discussing right now.
We do a lot of podcasts. I'd love to maybe be one of your test subjects on that.
Perfect. We always want an alpha.
We could do there. So something I find interesting here, and why I like the company so much, is you have wallet share opportunities. You have opportunity to get revenue from your current clients, more revenue than you're getting just by adding these other revenue streams. So one of the stories you had talked about was the supply and demand of education in the U.S. versus overseas, and how that's an example of how you're helping a university in the U.S. generate revenue by taking some of their stuff overseas. So maybe you could talk about one of those examples. I think that was a really good one to help understand what you're doing.
Sure, and maybe I can back that up a little bit to give your viewers some insight into how I think about high growth. I told you growth is my gig, right? And that is opening new markets or figuring out how to reposition what you do. I'm not talking about incremental change. Incremental change would be, hey, we've got a good handle on what we do in higher ed, and we're doing some in corporate. I want to go after more corporate. I'm definitely doing that, but that to me is incremental growth. When I think about creating big growth, the way I get there is I apply something called design theory. So it's some smart cats figured this out, and I think it's a damn good process, and I apply it. And design theory is about massive collaboration, just a tremendous bias towards action, and a fair amount of test and research, quick and turn around test and research. So when I apply design theory to MediaSite, I don't look at the fact that do I create a really good hardware box and I have a very good solid platform for storing it? I do, but that's not the game. I don't think that's our IP. We're damn good at it, but that's not the IP. What I think of as our special sauce is, in order to do all that, what we do well is we capture video, we ingest it, we enhance it, store it, and we push it back out. If you think about your business like that, it opens up your mind to more opportunities from a green field. And so one of the visions that I have that we are pursuing, that we're testing to see if it makes sense in the marketplace, is on a global education platform. So what this would entail is, imagine on one side of the equation, I have, say, 10 universities. I have an online MBA from NYU. I have an online engineering degree from MIT. You can see I'm picking sort of the best of different programs. I then have a platform in the middle, and then on this side, I have students, international students. But not international the way everybody thinks about it, right? Today, predominantly what happens is US universities go overseas, China and India, and they get the really rich kids, smart rich kids, to come back to America. They pay full tuition. It's a great program. But that represents what, 3% of a foreign country's population? I'm really interested in the other 95%. So I think developing countries are in there. So I imagine that this platform can do a few things. One, it's going to address and can address this tremendous supply-demand imbalance for education globally. As an example, 2 years ago, or maybe I guess it's 3 years ago now, in Nigeria, 1 million students applied to go to school. 1 million students, 200,000 got in. Why? That was the limit, that was the supply of education in Nigeria. You had 800,000 students with the motivation, the desire, and the money to go to college who couldn't. That's the supply-demand imbalance that I get excited about. That's one country. So that's one thing the platform addresses. Another thing that this platform would address is the reality that US universities and European universities, they're all fighting over the same students. Like my daughter, who just recently went to college, literally got material from 50 different colleges. They're all fighting for the same students on a pie that's getting smaller. Fewer people in the US and Europe overall going on pursuing four-year degrees. What they are looking for are new markets to get into. That's what this platform would address. What this platform also addresses the opportunity for foreign students to have access to education that they may not possibly have in country, and they probably would not be able to get overall, and yet it's an education that could literally transform their lives. So how does this platform work? If I go back to this idea of the platform, but those are the big business issues that it pursues. What I envision is, just like we do today, where we ingest content from one university and then we deliver that content to its students, whether they be on campus, in a classroom, or across the globe. Now what we would have is, on this side, we'd have the content, 10 universities, who would provide their content that we would ingest, we would enhance it, and we would put it on our platform. So these are the content providers, the universities. By the way, they already exist today. The content already exists today. What doesn't exist is a way for those universities to get their content to new markets. This platform would be built on, guessed it, yes, MediaSite. We'd essentially become our own largest client. We'd build a platform to do this for multiple universities. And then we would deliver that content to developing countries, not in a B2C model, but in a B2B model, where we'd have partners in countries that would have a benefit of working with us to enhance their education, most likely higher education institutions. And so now we have a way of distributing it to where the student and the demands are. If you think about what I just described, it's a wicked big market, and we have a right to win there. That's what we do today. We take content in from universities, enhance it, we store it, we deliver it to students. But now, as opposed to doing it for a single university, we're doing it on a global education platform.
And I think what I'm thinking about too, which seems exciting, is this also can help them, these universities, build branding, right? I mean, if this is a one spot that you could go to look at content and look what these universities are doing, you can do your shopping there. Even here in the U.S., you could start. It'd be a way for the universities to hey, here's a lecture, right? That we loved here, and a way to brand and market maybe to even students in the U.S. too. I'm thinking.
So I hadn't thought of that. I like that. I actually like that a lot, because what that does is it starts to move from the degree basis to just other content of value.
Right.
The reason I'm starting though with degrees is, if you look at things like, Coursera, great product or great offering, I think it's pretty unique. But if you look at the completion rates, they're pretty dismal. If you think of MOOCs, I mean, those completion rates, so MOOCs, massive online open education content, those rates are absolutely dismal as far as completion rates. And why? I think it's because everyone wants to learn more and they get excited about it and they hop on it, but after one or two classes, you kind of lose interest and the completion rate's not that high. When you go to a developing country and somebody is probably borrowing money from their aunt and their uncle to put together their tuition payment, and you're in a country, the reality is that an education can literally change the trajectory of your life. You have one hell of a motivated student. And so that's why right now we're focusing on this piece. But I do believe the next phase for us, Maj, is going to be sort of the disassembling of degrees to either like certificate levels or to just getting the best content on any topic. Imagine, who is the best.
I would pay. I would if I want to go learn something about finance. I don't even know. I mean, I could go get a perspective, from a professor or a class at Harvard or something. I'll pay for that.
Yeah, exactly. As long as he or she's the best, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you could leap forward this. I had we were just kind of spitballing, and we were leapfrogging this way forward. Now, there's a bunch of hurdles to get there, but just bear with me, Matt, for a minute. Who is the real, where does the content come from? Does it come from Harvard? It actually doesn't. I mean, they may own it, but the content comes from the teacher. And he or she is, and what if you could actually disaggregate the content creators from the university, like blow that model up? So all of a sudden now you're getting the best Algebra 101 lecture in the United States, and it's coming from Southern California University. And you're getting then the Algebra 2, and it's coming from somebody else. And you're starting to assemble the best of the best for content, of educational content. Now, you got accreditation issues there and everything else, but when I think like leapfrogging forward, like where could this be ultimately, those are the things that I start to think of. But the path there is, I think, this global educational platform is an absolute pathway to get there.
A true master class. We talk about master class. Really, this is awesome. Yeah. So now, in terms of your revenue right now, how much is coming from the education part of it?
Yeah, I would say. So let me break it down in a couple levels. One is this year I expect events will probably be close to 25% of our business. Hosting will be close to 25%. And then hardware services will be the other half, all those rolled together. Events, now I consider events, by the way, educational because we're working with associations, Thoracic Surgeon Association or cardiac surgeons, cardiac surgeons. That content is all educational. Almost all the content we focus on tends to be educational, right? It's either higher ed, classrooms, it's associations around training for memberships, or even in the corporate world, quite often it's training. So I share that because I would tell you that almost 100% of our content is around education. but it's which sector. But if you think about higher ed, then I would say roughly 65, I think is what we would say, 65% of our revenues are in the higher ed space.
Okay, that helps a lot. Cool. Now, when you talk about, let's talk about the wallet share within the universities, and then, well, let's talk about the market in two ways. From the customers you already have and the university side of the business, I guess we should be looking at universities and then the classrooms you're in, right? So what kind of penetration rate in terms of the universities you already are involved with? How much capacity is there to still go get some classrooms? Where are you in penetration rates there?
Yeah, so that one is literally all over the map. We have some universities where we are 100%, and we're talking hundreds of classrooms, 300-400 classrooms, and then we have some where they have 20 of 125 classrooms turned up. When I think about that, predominantly I'm thinking of undergraduate activity. So we do graduate activity, but when I think of like trying to figure out the percentage of classroom, I don't feel we have a good handle, to be frank, on that number, but my guess is we have 25% penetration on average. So there's room for that for growth, because if you think about what COVID has done, COVID was an accelerant of the technology, right? This technology's been around forever. It's an accelerant of the adoption of the technology. And so there were some universities that were clearly thinking ahead on this activity, were forefronters on this. And during COVID, if they were working with us, or even if it was one of our competitors, they were able to maintain their business model. There are other schools that got caught behind the 8 ball for sure, and they turned to things like Zoom. And I got to tell you, as a parent who watched his daughter attend what's considered a pretty high-end school, a school that I'm writing a damn big check for, and I'm watching her do chemistry lab on Zoom with like 40 tiles of other students, I'm pretty pissed off about that. And so I think the universities have learned, video is front and center for them as a business, and whether they saw it before and now they're coming kicking and screaming, they're all getting on board. So it's a long-winded way of saying I anticipate that the classrooms are going to be getting lit up again in very short order. That said, we've actually been growing our business all during this COVID period, even though we didn't have access to the classroom, which was our traditional go-to-market strategy. So we had to overcome that big headwind of we had an in-classroom strategy or an in-room strategy, and we did that by focusing on hosting and events and investing in those two areas.
Now, and I want to come back to that for 1 second, but on the same realm here. So there are obviously classrooms that don't have your video capture technology. So
Correct.
Are you able to go in there and still use your platform, or that a lot of these competitors also have their own similar all-in-one platform like you do, or they just have the video? I mean, how they're capturing the video? What are they doing with it then? So what's your competition doing to solve the problem you're solving in your traditional business?
Yeah, so the capture, if I go back to get into that life cycle capture, the organization or storage and the delivery, we are the only one that I'm really aware of that have focused on the capture piece. I mean, we've obsessed over capture to get it right because of the understanding of what audio does to it. It's not just about the video, but it's the audio, it's the classroom setup. And part of it is we are trying to create more and more content, ultimately for the storage part of our business. Remember, in pre-COVID, there were people who just spent their entire lives at universities and corporations evangelizing video because there wasn't enough adoption of it. That problem solved, right? Video creation is probably up 10. We have anywhere from 10 to 15x pre-COVID. So on the capture side of that, I'm pretty sure all of our competitors basically leave that up to the user. They let them worry about it. We obsess over that, and that's why we created our own hardware and software to do it. But today, what that tells you is everyone else is saying they'll take in ingest from whatever source is available, as we now do, coupled with our own. And then the platform piece, I would say the majority have some form of a storage platform. I'm not aware of anybody thinking about the content, strategically around the content, the way we are, which is, hey, there's gold in them, our hills, but you have to understand what business problem you're going after. And so, I gave an example of where it'd work in the event space. For me, in the education space, it's around student success. How many of videos did Joe watch that he was supposed to watch? Did he stop halfway through? Using machine learning to insert quizzing to ensure that the last section I actually understood the 3 sections, and if I didn't understand it, bringing me back into the video or pointing me to other content that would help educate me on that. That's how you start to think of mining that content to help the university solve their business problem, which is student success rates.
Great, great. Now, in terms of the penetration, or the universities you're in now, how much market share do you have in terms of what's available versus what's available out there?
Yeah, so I think there's a whole new arena that's happened. Because if I looked at it today, I literally have some where I have the entire university. So think of it, and when you think of university, imagine you have your school of engineering and your business school and perhaps a medical school, and then there's some where I may have the university, the engineering school only. So I think there's a transformation that's going to take place at the university level, and I think we're well ahead of on how we go to market for this now and how we think about it. But if historically, the universities, remember, a lot of universities didn't focus on video as a strategic element of their business. It was something they did and they knew they had to partake in. Again, I'm talking about the ones who are sort of more behind the ball. Excuse me. So what's happening now is, video is top of mind, top 5 issue for almost every CIO. So that came out recently in a couple CIO magazines. So what's happening now is some of the universities are saying, I don't want one platform for my engineering school, and I have no platform in my business school. Do I need to hold for a second? Okay, looks like we're still going, sorry. And so what you now have is decisions being made at the university level versus the dean of a particular school level. So that's going to open up a whole new realm of growth, as well as head-to-head competition in some cases.
You're muted.
So in terms of funding, do you see there's some opportunities where the government will start putting funding towards universities having to adopt some of this stuff you're talking about here?
All day long, yeah. So, part of the stimulus packages that have come out, we're working on a couple RFPs right now, multi-million-dollar RFPs, which are being funded through the government stimulus activity. And on the next one that's forthcoming, a lot of it, again, going towards the university, I expect that trend is going to continue. Absolutely. Excellent. And that's opened up new money, again, for people to be able to think forward about what's integral to their strategy. And video is coming out quite strongly from my perspective at the education level.
And what about lower levels of education? We've been talking about universities, and what about going down the food chain a little bit? Is there any opportunity there for you?
So Maj, it's a right question. And do I believe there's opportunity there? I do. I have a little bit of a bias here, which is selling at the K through 12 arena gets pretty complex because you have multiple buyers. You have the school, you have the board, you may have the county board. And so won't say that we would not do it. That's not, I don't mean to infer that at all. What I think, though, is we have more than ample opportunity right now to change our go-to-market strategy and what we're doing at the higher education market to go after that first. And that's clearly a market and space we know exceedingly well. So good question. I would always appreciate additional input from you or any of your members to help educate me on that. But right now, I would say it's not really a focus from my perspective on where we're going.
And by the way, if anybody has any questions, I should have said that earlier. You can put them in the chat, or you can just ask a question now. Raise your hand whenever you want, and we'll address those. So Joe, maybe from the financial perspective, now give us a little bit of background on financially where you want to be eventually on your gross margins. Talk about maybe any operating leverage that might exist in the business and your liquidity needs moving forward, if any.
Yeah. So, we've talked about different parts of it, right? I gave an example of like a big market that I pursue. maybe I could walk you through how I envision, how we're going to get there, right? How do you make that happen? And this is something I talked about almost day one when I came on the job, if you will, and how we would create growth. So understand, again, I didn't come here to turn what we have in place to becoming a nice, say, cute little profitable 10% growth business year over year, which we're now doing. That's not the gig that gets me going. I do that because I ultimately want to use that as the platform to become a $250 million company. And I truly believe a 10-bagger is doable. And I've had some history doing that. So in order to do that, though, to me, there was three big steps that need to take place. The first step was I wanted to get our financial house in order, and I'll talk about that. And then the second step was part of getting my financial house in order was to create some opportunities, some new product flows, revenue flows that would be high growth areas. And then the third is to go after some new big markets. So those to me, it's only 3 steps. How hard can that be, right? But to me, that's the pathway to getting there. So let's talk about the first one, which is around the financial viability, the financial soundness of our business. The reality is Sonic Foundry, up until last year, had been roughly on a 7-year revenue decline. Not at high, not big decline, but it declined for 7 years running. We had not been profitable in operations since forever. And so what I said on day one is that in the first year of operations, we would, A, stop the 7-year decline in revenues, and we'd start to turn that around. And we would do it by creating a couple new high-growth, high-margin revenue streams, which we're doing, and I'll go into the detail on those. And we'd become profitable. And we would do that all in 1 year. And for anybody who's been in business, I think you'd agree, that's pretty damn fast to have that much turnaround in the course of a year. And we're 7 months in, and we're doing it already. And this
You've been profitable. You've been three quarters. You've been profitable, right?
Correct.
You came in right away.
And it's important to understand that profitability, the majority of the profit, any cost savings that we put in create in the business, I've actually plowed back into investment inside the business. So I'm not trying to cost cut our way to profitability. We're going to grow our way to profitability, and that's exactly what we're doing. So in the 7 months now, we've exceeded every quarter last year. I believe this year we'll stop the 7-year decline. We did it. A big part of that was by recognizing up front that we had this opportunity in hosting because of the massive amount of video being created, and this opportunity in events because of the need to go virtual, the opportunity to go virtual. And so the money that we saved from a working capital standpoint, we literally plowed into those because, again, I want to grow our way out of those. And hosting is growing at 40% year over year. Events is growing at 20% year over year. And to your point, we've put up profitable quarters already. We will finish the year profitable. And that is while we are actually now starting to invest in sort of the new things that we're going to pursue. So we're starting to bring on UX designers and software designers. So we're self-investing the dollars we're creating. We did all that in 7 months. And to me, that was important so that we could do a couple things. One, that we could demonstrate to this audience and other investing audience, we know how to run a business, we know how to make it profitable, and we know how to create this trajectory. And we did what we said we were going to do. So an environment of accountability. So that, to me, is step one. Step two was the hosting and the events business. Identifying immediate opportunities that will have leg on them for the next several years so we can get out of the $8 million quarter over quarter revenue and start to generate the 9s, the 10s, and I think 11s and 12s. That can get us into the 11s or 12s. But understanding we're doing all that to then go and find new markets that are substantially larger that we have a right to win in. And to me, that global platform is an example of that. And that is how you then become a $250 million business. And as I said, I've done it several times in my career, and I fully anticipate we'll be doing it here. And from a margins perspective, I don't see any decrease in my margins. I'm not anticipating any for where we sit today. So our gross margins are in the 70-74% range, And with the pieces I just laid out, I'm not anticipating any decrease in that. And I do believe when we get into the new markets, which will have a heavy SaaS orientation, we'll probably be able to see upwards of the traditional 70-74 that we've been in.
Now we have some questions. I know Ed and Mark have some questions here. So Ed, why don't you go ahead? I think you had asked me a few seconds ago. You have some questions?
Sure. Thanks, Mozden. Hey, Joe. Nice to meet you.
Ed.
Thanks for taking the time today. I had a chance to watch, I think it was your shareholders meeting presentation a few weeks ago. Really enjoyed that. I just had a couple questions, one on sales and then one actually on product. And please correct me if I'm wrong on this understanding, but it seems like the media site sales process is very high touch. And just was kind of curious with your vision on the platform and the transition from hardware to software. Is there a world where you envision kind of making that easier, a little bit more cloud oriented? I think Maj gave some personal anecdotes at the beginning of things he might like to see. But just imagining a Maj type of business that is smaller, wants to use the tools and services that you offer, but it just wants to do sign up self-service and use that. Is that something that you're kind of building into the vision?
Yeah, so you're spot on. When I think about the ability to scale, we're going to have something that is much more appropriate for self-serve orientation. Having said that, the reality of where we are today, I joke we're an engineering firm who built a great engineering products, not necessarily for engineers, but they had to be pretty sophisticated users. And as you may have heard me just mention, the people that I'm looking to hire new, and by the way, this is the first time I think in 5 years that we're hiring net new employees, right? So employees left, we replaced them, but we didn't hire net new. And we're now hiring net new, but it's in the area of UX, software development, and it's exactly to go after, I shouldn't say just that. It's about the UX of our product to make it definitely more user-friendly, if you will. And ultimately, that allows for greater scale in the mid-market. So to address that part of the question, Ed. So yes, I absolutely envision that's part of the future. And to me, it's also part of just the direction we have to be to have a more market-relevant product offering. When you think
thanks.
SaaS.
Yep, and then that kind of segues into the second question. Maj and I had, I think, a pretty healthy discussion offline on this with the user experience. I agree with the vision. I think it's spot on that you want to be on the screen that your end user is looking at or that the customer is looking at. And it seems there's a huge opportunity to really kind of level up that experience where you've got maybe slides, especially on mobile. You've got slides that are really small and hard to see. You've got another speaker screen or multiple speaker screens. You've got to scroll to navigate around that. I assume that's going to kind of be a part of that UX investment that you're working on.
It is, but I'm punting that one right away to, that's why I hired Steve McKee. So, if you recall, we used to have a CTO in our business, and I think it's an important role, good in a lot of businesses, but when I think about our business in the pathway to becoming a high growth company, I don't want to be a technology company. I want to be a product and services company. That's where you lead. That's where the marketplace has a demand. Now you use technology to get there, but the thinking has got to be, what's the marketplace issue and how do I make it as easy as I possibly can for the marketplace to consume this? And that's what Steve has a tremendous background in, is product development, user experience, and then bringing that to market. So he reminds me regularly that our mobile solution is, let's just say, less than perfect. And it's got to be, he's thinking of that orientation, to even support that and give you a little more on that, Ed, we've always been a waterfall development company, right? So we would do a release and we'd put out one release a year, on give or take a year. Well, you may have seen in the last press release, Steve is moving us all from that to being an agile organization built around Scrum teams with product owners, with release cycles that now are in the 2 weeks or 4 week cycle, specifically to be able to add on features on a much more rapid pace, but always on a software orientation so that we can push it out and it's going to be consistent across the platform. So to me, that's a super exciting development on our go-to-market strategy from a technology perspective, being driven by Steve McKee. So
Cool.
those are some background items, but could I tell you exactly how we're going to do it? I can't. I am an engineer, but it's beyond my my license to speak on it.
Yeah, no, thanks. I understand it, and I'm happy to hear that's more. The question's more just around. I think it's such an important part of a SaaS business to have tools that are kind of easy to use. It's a key to growth. And just the last thing I'll share that I've learned in investing in SaaS companies. Somebody told me once that the wrong kind of SaaS business, it's hard to sell, hard to set up, and hard to service. And you want to look for businesses that are easy to sell, easy to set up, and easy to service. And I know, Maj, you've heard me kind of say that ad nauseum over and over again, but I think you guys are set up uniquely for that. So I'm excited to see where you go next. And again, thanks for your time today.
Yeah, so I'm jotting that down. Hard to sell, to set up, and what was the other one?
Hard to sell, hard to set up, and hard to service. I always think of hardware businesses that way, and especially if you're sending people off to events. And then really what it should be is easy to sell, easy to set up, and easy to service.
Yeah, no, exactly correct. I like it. I know service, and and that's a big theme, again, coming back to what Steve's view is. When you start going in that orientation about the easy to service piece in particular, boy, you can take a lot of costs out of the business, right? And you can point them at other things, because right now when it's hardware, it's like, what version are you on? Well, I can be rolling out this software, but people can't take advantage of the opportunities yet. And so the new features aren't out there because they're still on an older version of hardware, et cetera. So I may steal that line from you. I'm going to go give it to Steve and say, this is what I want. And when I'm done with this.
Just give me a credit.
Yeah. Done.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Ed.
And let me interject here, Joe. So I don't think Ed owns a stock at all yet, and we've been going back and forth for a year, me and Ed, on that. And if he does buy it, though, you're going to want to pick his brain as a really great software engineer, and he can give you some great insight, I think, into his experience.
I'll take all the help I can get, and would love to have you as a shareholder.
So let's go over to Mark. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
All right, Maj. Thanks for the time today. So, looking at your financials over the last several quarters, the company did achieve positive revenue growth from the June 19 quarter till the March 20 quarter. That was 4 quarters of revenue growth. And in 3 of those 4 quarters, there was positive operating income. And then, of course, you had the June 2020 quarter had a big year-over-year down movement. How do we look at your progress thus far through that lens where we saw, growth rebound to 10% year-over-year in September, 14% year-over-year in December, but then came in flat, basically year-over-year in the March quarter? Thanks.
So hold it. The last 2 quarters have both exceeded the previous year. Okay, I know what you're referring to. So the big piece there is remember where we were in March the previous year. We were not in COVID.
Yep.
So in that quarter,
Right.
Remember what our business model is, which our business model is we are historically an in-classroom offering. So last year, when we were selling in-classroom offerings, we were fine to go full bore from a revenue generation standpoint. Also, the events business was full bore in that traditional model of being the guys and the gals in the back of the room. Fast forward a year, this year, the comparison is that was the first quarter where our go-to-market strategy was generating about 0 because there was nothing going on in the classroom. And the events business, that events business had dried up. So we're comparing two totally different scenarios. One where we were able to operate full on bore, and then a year later, well, really within 6 months for me from when COVID hit, we had to figure out how to retool the entire business to offset the tremendous headwind of COVID for the in-room go-to-market strategy. So by virtue of my perspective would be, think of what we overcame, and yet we still were able to match that revenue of a year when we were able to sell fully freely, if you will. And so
Right.
on an annual basis, I anticipate you will see, again, I don't think we're not going to see 20% or 10%, well, maybe 10%. revenue growth in our first year. The first step is to build momentum into your sales pipeline of turning around what has been a 7-year decline. But that quarter to me was head-to-head going to be really difficult because it was the first quarter last year where we got to end with the go-to-market strategy that had worked, and this was the first quarter where that strategy was 0 on a head-to-head basis, year over year.
So you're saying that your comps were easier on a year-to-year basis in the September and December quarter recently?
No, I'm saying, I would say the way I would frame that is the comps were more consistent, right? Again, if I looked at the comp of our second quarter, which would be January, February, March of 2020, we were in our traditional go-to-market strategy in classroom, and we had full access to all the universities and such.
Right, you did, but you had that in the December and September quarter prior to that, no?
Correct. The difference being in the September, I'm sorry, repeat the time frame?
So, if I look back to September of last year, then we go to we have the September quarter, the September quarter of 2019, then the December quarter of 2019, right? And then as you described, the March quarter of 2020 when COVID hits. The following quarter is a wipeout. Then in September of 2020, you had 10% growth over September 2019, and then you had 14% growth in December of 2020 over December of 2019.
I'm not sure if I got all the dates lined mentally, but what I would tell you in the first quarter, a big piece of that was the turning around of the events business, because where events were shut off, and now all of a sudden at the end of last year, so at the end of last year, calendar year, we were bonkers on events because we were able to turn on our virtual approach both here and Japan, and there was high demand. In what is our second quarter, the first calendar year quarter, there's been lighter demand for events as there is traditionally. So that's a calendaring piece around the events business. I think the big comparison would be this quarter that we're about to close today, right? Because last year it was in COVID, this year it's in COVID, and to me it's a better indicator of A, overcoming any of the COVID headwinds, and B, sales performance.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, sorry about it's hard to map because we have fiscal years to calendar years. But this to me is the quarter that we just closed is probably the best apples to apples comparison of how we're performing, at least under my leadership, versus previously.
Yeah, I think what he was saying, Joe, was because you had if your March quarter of 2020, right, and then your December quarter of 2019, and the previous before that, probably all were not affected by COVID, but you still were able to grow in those quarters. I think year over year, right, when you on the recent ones, and then March came along, and that didn't continue, even though it was going up against a non-COVID quarter, right?
That's correct, Maj. That's what I'm saying is that the September quarter of 2020 and the December quarter of 2020, there was double-digit year-over-year growth versus non-COVID comps, even though obviously September and December quarters of this year of 2020 were COVID affected.
Yeah,
and I think what Joe's saying is that maybe there was some influx. There was a lot of event business coming in, maybe to counteract some of the less of. The virtual online event business was able to a lot of that came in at one time to account for the less brick and mortar events, and then the March quarter kind of didn't have enough of the virtual yet, maybe because we're just reopening and opening thing. What's going on, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so it's exactly correct. So the events business, when COVID got shut down and we came up with a solution, we were able to very rapidly go back to our clients and also have a pricing arrangement that was different, and remember, fewer offerings, right? Because a lot of people were out of that business. And so we were able to drive very substantial events revenue business, which I expect we'll get overall, both here and Japan. what we did see and what we're seeing, a little bit of the previous quarter was at the beginning of the year, which is typically an event slower business for us. I mean, that time frame. We saw the impact of that because that was, remember, we're offsetting the headwinds we have in hardware through hosting and events. And so events was not as full cylinder, if you will, during that period. What we're now seeing in the period that just closed to me is really an apples to apples comparison of partially our strategy and our sales success or not, depending on how the quarter closed. That said, I'm pretty comfortable we'll have a good quarter.
And remind me again of the hardware headwinds how they are most recently.
Yeah, so the challenge is our go-to-market strategy is about equipping classrooms and boardrooms and training rooms with hardware equipment. And during COVID, nobody's in the classroom, nobody's buying equipment to put into the classroom or the boardroom. And so hardware's been a hell of a headwind for us for the last 9 months that we had to overcome. And
Great.
so,
thank you very much.
Yeah, and to me that's an important thing, a factor, right? If you thought of last year's revenues, finishing out at 34 and change million, that was when COVID has had mixed blessings for different companies. For us, I see it as huge opportunity because it's just changed the way people think of video, right? It's created tremendous consumption and creation. It's changed the way people operate. But if you break it down at our business level, it actually was a tremendous headwind for our traditional go-to-market strategy, which only reinforces why it was so damn important that out of the gate we identified hosting and events as areas to invest in so that we could offset the slippage that we anticipated in hardware.
Great, awesome. Any other questions here? We take up a lot of Joe's time here, so.
No, it's all been good. So
Awesome.
can I just maybe, I'll tell you why I'm bullish, why I remain bullish, if you will, in our business.
Yeah, why don't you do that? Yeah.
At a very high level. So though COVID has been rough on us in the short term, and we're offsetting and we've overcome that, COVID has created this amazing as bad as it has created this amazing background, I believe, for the space in which we operate in. Couple that with, we have a game plan. The 3 layers of growth that I shared with you. One was to have that first piece out of the gate, which is demonstrating we can turn around the business, the traditional business. We can turn that piece around, and we can create some great pockets of success that are going to drive some upward revenue movement in the next short term, say a couple years, 2 to 3 years, while we're building for our next market piece. And so, if you believe, and if you look at it and you say, hey, that's what they said they're going to do on day one, and here we are 6 months later or 7 months later, and we've done everything we said we'd do on that first phase, and when you can see that we're investing in that second phase and you can see where hosting's going, to me, we have a very mapped out, logical approach on how to grow that business, and it's coupled with a management team. So, the management team, yes, it's me, but if you look at my senior management team, roughly 60% of the people are new or in new roles. And I have personally assembled this team because they understand growth, the way I think of growth or what it means, and they understand corporate development as an activity of getting there. And so I'm very confident that we have the management team to be able to drive that. And you also see I've made some changes at the board. When I looked at the board and I saw, we had 3 CFOs. I love CFOs. It's very important. I don't need 3 on the board. What I saw was missing from my perspective on the board was a technologist and a corp dev person in the ed tech space, and we went out and acquired that. So we've assembled the team at every layer in our business for the growth that I'm talking about and the type of activity it takes to get there. That's why I'm confident.
And a question on valuation. So if you were going to compare yourself, who do you want investors to compare you to? I mean, you're moving to this more cloud kind of data analytics solution, hopefully at least, right?
Yeah.
Hosting solution. Have you thought about how that should look?
So I have a sarcastic comment on that, and then I can probably give a little more thoughtful one. My sarcastic would be, geez, if you think it doesn't bother me that I look at somebody like Kumu, who's got, I don't know, what, 20 million in revenue and probably 15 million in losses, or at least on a quarterly basis, and they're sitting at a market cap probably now 3 times mine. If you think that doesn't irritate me at times, you'd be greatly mistaken. But do I want to be compared to that company? No, that's too small revenue. That's not what I think of, changing revenue. And it's in the same sector, head-to-head sector. So when I think of valuations, what I think of is I would do evaluations based on the profile the company will become, which is an ed tech platform addressing global educational issues. And that can come in the form I shared you, as well as other areas. For associations, it's still about global education. And so to me, that's the type of multiple or valuation that I'd be ultimately seeking. With the revenues that I told you, I believe we can get to.
Right. Great. That's awesome, man. Yeah, I was just pulling up Kuma right now to see what's going on with it recently. I know I had a big run a while ago. It's come back down.
Yeah, they've had a tough run. And that was interesting. When I first came on, people were saying, well, you want to drive your stock price up, you want to drive your stock price up. And gosh, I absolutely do. But the last thing I wanted to do was to be a flash in the pan. And so, again, going back to our approach, it is, I'm going to demonstrate we know how to run this business, turn it profitable, start to create these new growth arenas, and then layer in some new, what I call the markers for the big growth pieces. And I'm confident the stock price will follow. What I would hate to do is to create some buzz and then to not have the metrics or milestones to support it. And I think we're now putting, those milestones and metrics on the board. We're doing, as I said, everything we said we'd do on day 1, we've already done by month 7, and I thought it'd take us 12 months.
Very impressive. Actually, I see Kuma went all the way from like $1 to $10. Now it's back to 2 again. So it had a really kind of what you were talking about there.
Yeah.
It was also interesting, and there was a going private offer by the board, by one of your board members back in early 2020. $5 a share, your stock's sitting under that. So I find that kind of strange.
Yeah, I find it strange. Again, remember that frustration piece at times. However, I look at it, it's a hell of a buying opportunity from that perspective. So, and that was, and for people's edification, that was an offer to go private from our chairman, Mark Bursch, who put in a $5 share offer. And at the time, the stock was trading, I believe, in 2 or 3. So this was before my time. I didn't have a front row seat, but that's what I understand to be the case. And I would share with you, ultimately the shareholders said no, because they felt with COVID that there's more leg to this business, as I do today. That said, Mark still participates in the business, and he's still looking to be, he wants as much ownership as he can get as he can get. So to me, he's a good partner. I work with him pretty regularly. I meet with him pretty regularly, talking about different strategy approaches, and the fact that ultimately I envision that he will go through some dilution, because as I like to share with him, hey, I want more shareholders, not named Bursch. So and he understands the value in doing that.
And talk about we have a question here in the chat room, maybe your current cash position and the need to raise money to execute your growth strategy.
Yeah, so the current cash position is quite strong. In the U.S., we're probably sitting on $2 million. In Japan, I want to say it's 2.5. I think I got $500,000 in the Netherlands. So cash is not a concern at all for the business. What I am lining up some financial instruments along those lines. My goal, when I think of raising cash to create growth, clearly we're starting to now demonstrate we could self-fund, but that just doesn't fit into the speed at which I'd want to be operating. And so my view is, how do you create multiple avenues to be able to raise capital when you want it? And so, that includes everything from a line of credit to lining up potential debt activities if we were to do that. But I also think we need to be in a stronger position to do a capital raise, an equity capital raise. And to me, that would mean an uplisting would be necessary to do that. So I am actually actively pursuing all of these things, not because I'm looking to pull the trigger today per se, but because when we need the money, or we decide we want the money, I want to be able to have as many options as available to our business.
And are acquisitions in your future, or is it you just see too much organic type of opportunity here for you?
So I think acquisitions are, I would see in our future, but right now I see enough organic activity to provide the runway that I want to provide for the growth that we want. When we start talking about some of those markers like the global education pieces and things like that, that's when I could see starting to partner in whether it be an acquisition or a partnership and again, the focus would be to accelerate the pathway to the big growth activity. So right now, I'm open to it. I wouldn't say no to things, but I would say it's not really in my line of sight of what we need right now to accomplish the direction I want to go. But going forward, I absolutely believe that to be the case. And again, if you look at some of the changes I made, change in a CFO where I brought back Ken Miners, who's got a lot of corp dev and acquisition activity. And if you look at the board members that I brought on, 2 who both have extensive experience in corporate development and fundraising activities, you can see that I'm preparing for, what I anticipate we'll need in the future.
And lastly, from my side here, Joe, any kind of buyback program you could put in place at all, at least have it ready to go? I mean, at some point.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't.
A share repurchase program. Do you have do you have that lined up right now? I didn't even check. Or is that something you maybe want to put in get the board to approve maybe at these levels?
Yeah. So, did you say buyback?
Share repurchase program. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Because of our cash position, we clearly could do something of that nature. What I would tell you I'm more focused on right now, though, is less about that and more towards improving shareholder equity. So when I came on board, our shareholder equity was a negative number. Now we're in probably after this quarter, we'll be in a couple $1 million position. And so I'm actually more focused on raising that because that'd be one of the requirements. Should we decide to go to the NASDAQ, that would be one of the requirements that they have a $5 million minimum on shareholders' equity. And so I'm very focused on that activity more so than I would expect that to be more forthcoming, if you will, or near term than some form of a buyback.
So thank you, Joe. This has been awesome, man.
Maj, yeah, this was a lot of fun. I appreciate the chance. It was fun to get to see some of your members because I know we've passed across a few times, and I always appreciate the opportunity to talk about Sonic Foundry. And as you can tell, I remain very optimistic, very confident on our trajectory. So love to chat more, given the time.
Well, again, get some updates as you move along your growth curve. And again, we're recording this. Joe, you guys are recording on your own platform, so I want to see what that looks like and how we can maybe interact with that and use it. That's good, and we'll share that with our members too. And just good luck, man, with everything, and we'll be talking soon.
I'll take luck and advice. Thanks. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. See you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks a bunch.
See you guys.
You guys.